Hello, everybody. This is Luis Rodriguez, and we're here at the wonderful space Tia Chucha Centro Cultural and Bookstore in Silmar, California. For those that don't know, of course, people that do know and respect what we do, thank you for coming back, always being part of our growing familia of artists and writers, theater people, and community. This is a growing community. We have a very special event today. I'm very happy to have this event because this is our latest book. Tia Chucha Press, as you know, has been out for over 33 years, and we've done amazing books. And I'm very proud of the latest book we have, Cipota Under the Moon by Claudia Castro Luna. And here we have Claudia Castro Luna here with us. And so we're going to have an amazing dialogue. It'll be freewheeling. We do welcome questions and comments, so we'll have time to hopefully hear. We have some people here in live, and then also those that are out there in the internet world. You get a chance to ask us questions. But first of all, I just want to say the beauty of the book is really the language and the imagery and the robust emotional power of the poems, because I'm a poet from way back, and I've been publishing many books, and I'm always looking for something different. You know, I want something that has never been done before. No, this book has never been done before. Your work stands by itself. It's very much your authentic voice, and I think that's very important. And I just want to say that, and I'll have Claudia talk more about it, but if anybody please buy our books. We're online, tiachucha.org/bookstore. You can get all our books. I want to point out some of the others, especially with the Central American writers in our country. We're giving a lot of space for Central American writers. It's very important because they're a very important part of our community and our population. They're growing, they're very active, and we want to embrace the Central American community as much as we can. So we've created one of our most best-selling books, The Wandering Song, an anthology, Central American writing in the United States, edited by Leticia Hernandez Lenares, Rubén Martinez, and Hector Tobar. And Claudia is also in this book, some of the best Central American writing in the country. It's used in schools, it's used in libraries, it's all over the place. We also came out with a beautiful book recently, Humberto Acabal, a Quiche Mayan poet from Guatemala. This is his book, In a Courtyard of the Moon, translated by Miguel Rivera. Very beautiful book, and of course, our good friend Leticia Hernandez Linares' book, Mucho Muchacha, which we will reprint this October. We're going to redo this again, so you have access to this. We have other good books, even other Central American books, but I thought I would show you this. But let's start with Claudia. ¿Cómo estás? How you doing?
Gracias, Luis. Good. Súper contenta de estar aquí. Sí, I'm so happy to be here.
And you're coming all the way from Washington State. So what I want to know, again, is maybe what is, como se dice, the inicio of trying to do an amazing book like this? I know you're trying to say a lot of things, but what is the underlying motivo that really drives you to do the poems that you did in Cipota Under the Moon?
That's a great question. And before I answer it, I have to tell everybody out there and here that to be in this space this afternoon with Luis Rodriguez is a dream come true for me. Thank you, Luis, for joining me and for publishing me. It really is really, really special because Tia Chucha has made spaces for Central American writers like no other press has. It's so important and dear to me that my book is part of that catalog, you know?
Of course, you have to be there.
Yes, I'm so thankful that is the case. So I appreciate that. And it's a joy. I started the day in Seattle, and I'm looking at this beautiful sunset here. It's Silmar, it's amazing.
The mountains are nice.
I know, it's gorgeous, gorgeous. So to your question, so this is my fourth book. So I have a chapbook, and I've written other books of poetry, but this is the first one that really tells of my story. Leaving El Salvador as a 14-year-old when the war was happening, and coming to the U.S. and what that experience of war was like. And the city is there really because there's so few, there's so little, there's just little drops. I mean, this is the exception, I would say, the big exception. This book that has, you know, our stories, and so I really, and also because there's very little, even in El Salvador, written from the perspective of a woman and a kid at that, like a youth that lived through that war, to just put it on paper and to say, here's a record. This is what it was like. So, I mean, it took a long time. This poems were collected over, you know, a long time. And it was finally COVID that forced me to realize, oh, you know, I've written a lot. Maybe this could come together in a collection. But that was the desire to tell this story of war and you know, resistance, right?
So I think it's important for people. I know people know, but it's important to know Central America went through tremendous amount of wars, especially in the 80s. But actually, the wars were way beforehand.
Yeah.
And people don't know this. Somebody was just telling me they just found out in 1932 was the largest massacre of indigenous people in one shot in El Salvador.
Yeah.
That terrible massacre of based out of Rizalco and all the indigenous communities that were just killed. And I know when I was in El Salvador, I would talk to some of the Pipit people there. They're now coming out.
Yes,
they're
they
now
are.
doing their rituals. They're doing, but they said they could never do it. They couldn't talk their language. They speak a version of their own Nahuatl. They have their own way.
Yeah.
But there's some, and I was in tears when we did a ceremony there in Izalco with them, and I was in tears because I know how hard it took for them to be able to do this.
Yes.
So people just need to know the devastation of that war, but also the role of the United States.
Yes.
The United States played a very terrible role. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how, because now you're in the United States, now you're in the country, and this government, not, you know, I'm not trying to say everybody and the people, but this government played a terrible role in those wars.
Yeah, people don't know about 1932, you know, and even in El Salvador, the last, I don't go that much, but not the last, but the previous to last trip, I was in Izalco, and they had a ceremony of commemorating, and we were standing on top of the mass graves.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was an extermination, a genocide of Native people in El Salvador. And so growing up, even though I am from that area of El Salvador, you never heard any, it got erased, you know, and Native identity was really erased because people were terrified.
It'd be an insult if you said somebody es un indio or te ves como un indio.
That's an insult. Yeah, that was. And now there's a renaissance, and there's you know, schools teaching Nahuatl and Cacaopera more on the eastern part of El Salvador. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, I actually, because we talked about this integrating poems into what you're saying, I want to read this poem called Caravans, because for a long time when my family came in 1981, you know, we knew we were coming to the place that was exacerbating the war. And I've always said that if the U.S. had not been involved, the issue in El Salvador was a human rights issue. It was right to land, right to health, right to education. That's what we were fighting about, right? And the U.S. got involved and just blew it out of proportion and made it something that wasn't, but flooded the country with weapons and money, right? And so in that war, to me, it never ended. We're still in that war, you know?
You're still fighting for those same issues.
Exactly. Yeah, and people coming here are still escaping the aftermath of the war. So this one is called Caravans. Marching to the tune of millions of dollars in military aid, a caravan set out in 1980 from the United States toward El Salvador. As part of it, more than 32,000 M16A1A2 rifles snake southward, each machine capable of dislodging 800 rounds of ammunition per minute, 800 bullets per minute on the first day, the second, and every subsequent day for 12 years. Years of dispatching obedient bullets to seek and kill the soft bodies that were their targets. 3 decades and thousands of deaths later, a new caravan, not of weapons, but of war survivors, inches north to the place where the rifles came from. women pushing strollers, fathers and sons, fathers and daughters walking hundreds of miles walking. A boy wears a scapular, the cloth soaked with holy water now encrusted with sweat. A woman walks carrying fresh fear in her belly, the inevitability of their steps over their silent unforgetting. On the way, an angry river drowns the voices of a young father and his toddler daughter, the two face down, her little arm around his neck. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Sometimes the line in question bends on itself, takes a rapacious detour, orbits around the sun a few times. So it is that yesterday bullets claim bodies today. And it is that way. I believe firmly that, you know, those it's just the same war, a different dress for the same war, you know.
You know, one of the things that people may not be aware too is that, especially the last few years, the migrants on the border the majority have been from Central America. Mm-hmm. They're leaving another kind of war, the war that's related to the violence in the streets, to the violence from coming out of the intense poverty, mm-hmm. but also the corruption in all these countries.
Yeah.
And then of course even eco problems and ecology problems, because there's been hurricanes that have impacted countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and also El Salvador. But mm-hmm. in other words, you're getting devastation and people are coming here. And the sad thing is that they're coming to this country, which again also does not have open arms.
Yeah.
But they have to come because how are they going to live?
Yeah.
So I know that's another part of the story that doesn't get told. The Central Americans that have had to leave their land. And I know because I've been in all those countries, they're beautiful lands, beautiful, nothing wrong with the people, nothing wrong with the land. It's just you can't live there. Mm-hmm. And so now they're coming over in large numbers, and that's mostly what's at the border now.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the ecological changes and devastation are serious. I mean, I have family in El Salvador who tell me, you know, May is when the rains come, right? But our climate is so disruptive that it either pours and destroys the seedlings, or it doesn't rain at all. So there's droughts and overflow. Lots of communities completely washed down because of the way that the rain is so unpredictable. It used to be May 3rd, you know, Dia de la Cruz. You put out your cross in the middle of this is an indigenous tradition mixed with Catholicism, but it marked the beginning of the rainy season, and it was like clockwork. May, it's when it started raining, so that's when the corn goes in the ground. But now, you know, like right now there's torrential rain, but we've had years where there's been drought. Yeah. And so those are also consequences of those countries paying for the overconsumption of energy in countries like this one. And the U.S. is the biggest perpetrator, right, of fossil fuel consumption. So that's a story that we never hear, you know? Yeah, for sure.
Do you have a poem or something related to some of this?
To some of that? Yeah. Well, let's see. I'm thinking of, so the book is divided in 4 parts. And the first part is about the war. The middle part is us as a family of 4 coming here, thinking that we were safe from the war, only to find urban violence and racism, you know, in the U.S. And then a reprieve for me, because I'm able to go back. Puedo ir de regreso. And so it's like, how do you encounter this new place, right? That's the third part. And then the last part is more, you know, we're here. I'm here. I exist, right? And the reason why I'm here has to do with the fact that the U.S. got involved in the war. I mean, that's why we come here. Yeah. I mean, people say, you know, why are you coming here? Well, because your country actually created these linkages, and we are now inextricable. I mean, I say Salvadoran history is U.S. history now, you know?
That's absolutely true.
So I have this poem. This one's called Ask the Bees. And in this poem was one of the chances I got to go back to Chalatenango, which is the region in El Salvador that's close to Honduras. And that was during the war. That was like a free zone. There was a lot of guerrilleros who lived there, who inhabited that part of the country. And I had always wanted to go see it because I'm from Ahuachapán. I'm from the part close to Guatemala, and it's so beautiful there, as you say. It's really gorgeous. And you know, it talks about a woman making a living out of the land, and you could imagine that with the land changing, somebody like this person would no longer be able to provide for herself and her kids, right? So this one's called Ask the Bees. On my last trip to El Salvador, spiraling down a remote mountain highway, I spotted a woman and her child sitting on the side of the road. A sun-bleached umbrella cast shade on her and on a table stacked with unlabeled glass vessels filled with honey. Behind her, a steep gorge, ravishing emerald wound, hummed a tune that told of the beginning of things. The honey came from there, she said, pointing at the jungle below. Mystery of forests, mystery of honey, necessity of survival. This mother making a living from the industriousness of hirsute insect fairies, harvesting nectar and iridescent powder from wildflowers, making beauty edible. The honey emanated a neon glow, bright and potent as if alive. The force of the gorge, the song of the torogos, the roar of the jaguar, the gloss of the leaves, the soil, volcanic ash hung suspended inside each container. For us to remember this brilliant day, I said to Papa, handing him a jar. This day when we stood arm in arm and talked about the war, what it took from all of us, a day when I asked him to name every tree, every flower we came across, and he did. He named them all, a gesture that said we are from here, from this forsaken place where we know the names of things. On my return at the Dallas airport, a customs officer confiscated my jar. Later, in a cafe waiting for my flight to Seattle, I felt my cheeks wet, my tears like a meandering rivulet through the lush terrain that sustained the bees, that made the honey, that helped the woman help herself. In the airport's sterile setting, I considered the honey of things. How much time would have to pass before I'd walk next to my papa once more? How is it that we overlook what is important, value the wrong things? What would they say about the meaning of grief if I asked them, the bees, who turned sun's fire into edible gem? Magicians and scientists at once, they have for millennia healed us, nourished us, pollinated this blue sphere we call home. This ancient alchemist hunting for the truth and power to transmute base metals into gold searched in vain. Bees have known the secret all along, transforming with exquisite care, which is also love, yellow dust into liquid gold.
This is why we publish this beautiful book. Your language is so powerful, beautiful, image laden, but it's hard to talk about trauma, and yet you're able to do it and redeem it with this beautiful poetry.
Oh, thank you.
It's powerful. So Cipota Under the Moon, this is the book we're talking about. Claudia Castro Luna is the author. She's here with us, and she's reading from this beautiful book. I recall when I was reading it, I was under a spell. You put me as a reader, just a spell.
Thank you.
And you do carry a lot of the pain, but you, again, find that the beauty that comes out of a lot of ugliness. And just so be clear, the ugliness is coming from places by design. Those wars were preventable. These things did not have to happen.
Yes.
It's about power, it's about land, control of land, it's about who's going to control the Central American Northern Triangle, they call it, because it's very important strategically for the United States, but only for empire reasons.
Yes.
That's not for other reasons other than empire, and it did everything it could to destroy the people and the power of the people, and forcing people to even leave their land. So I think this is what you cover in this beautiful book.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Personal things, very beautiful things.
Yeah, thank you. You know, someone said that to me about how, for instance, nature shows up in this book so much, right? And my dad is a huge gardener, so all my life. And in Salvador, we all have patios, with palos. We call them palos. Árboles son palos, right? And there's fruits and flowers, and it's just bursting with this color and life when you go there. I mean, that's been my gift returning as a person who has been able to return, is like, oh my God, I come from a beautiful place.
Absolutely.
And the wars made it, we were just on survival mode for so long that it prevents you from the distance you need to see yourselves, to see ourselves, to see. It's amazing that Salvadorans continued to live with the force, making space for joy and insisting on life throughout those really dark years of that. I mean, I was telling you, I'm working on this memoir, and I sit there and look at the historical material, and I'm just speechless at the brutality of that time there, and it didn't need to happen, as you say.
That's the most important thing. None of it needed to happen.
Yeah.
And all that suffering for the power of a few.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's important is that, like countries like El Salvador, Honduras, even Haiti, which I've never been at, but I've met Haitians. They go through hell and back, but they're some of the most beautiful, most expressive, most giving people. Mm-hmm. And if all the suffering does not take away the decency of the people, and that's important because people don't understand. There's some terrible things that happen in those countries. I get it, but mostly I've been going to El Salvador for 30 years. Yeah. Guatemala, I spent some time in Honduras. The people were always generous, always giving, always full of life and breath, and yet the suffering that's pushed on them. And again, what bothers me, and I'm sure that you're expressing, this is our government role in this. It has to be held accountable. Yeah. The United States played a terrible role and continues to play a terrible role. Yeah,
absolutely. I was in the writing of this book, and just as these poems were coming through, I kept on thinking, because the war, I mean, personally, I have physical, I have been debilitated physically from my years of that intense violence, because I was very young and I think very impressionable, and there was nothing in the years after immigrating here. PTSD wasn't understood as it is now. So we lived all those years not knowing at all. We didn't have a word for it, and so I think, so I know for a fact that physically I suffer from that. And yet when I think about it, I think, I don't think I know I would not change any of it, because I think the other, like you said, in the middle of that suffering that way, or being in those circumstances, also means that the beauty and joy is a plenitude. It gives you a depth of feeling and understanding that you would otherwise not have. And that is a gift, to hold on to that. I think that's what I'm trying to do in this book, is to try to hold on to that piece, despite that. So I'll read the opening. May I read the opening poem, which talks about exactly that. This is called Agua de Beber. Once there was a girl who lived in a country called Fear. There her fingers cracked and split into sharp mouths that screamed what she could not scream. Sometimes her hands itched and she scratched them viciously. With the scratching, her pores swelled. At peak moments they burst, releasing the liquid within. The girl feared many things but death most of all, not her own, but that of her parents, through whom she saw and valued the world. That little girl is still around. She lives inside me, sneaking pistachio ice cream whenever she can. Now, when my hands begin to crack and split, I panic and recoil from the pain this causes and from the pain they cause the girl. Long ago, my hands learned to cry in my stead. They carved deltas at the tips of my fingers that took me to ocean. Oh, how deep, how vast the great water, how it sloshes inside my belly. Oh, how beautiful the world to which I belong. So, again, that idea that I'm alive, and I'm grateful for that, you know. I'm grateful to experience this deep emotions, right? And to, through writing, in my case, transform them into make them something else.
Yeah.
That has been very powerful in my life, to find a way in life, you know, that the redemptive power of writing.
Yeah, so to me, that's really why this book is important and why we need to publish more books like this.
Yes.
And
yes.
your voice becomes imperative, especially for our times. And this is why I'm really honored to be able to publish a book like this, because we need those voices. And the thing about it is the ability to sing through all the trauma. I know people may find that odd, but you got to learn how to do that, because otherwise, the suffering, the PTSD is so overwhelming. The silence within it is so deep.
Yeah.
And I think we need to hear, we need to see, and that's what your poetry does. It gives us all the texture of the pain, but also the ability to release the pain, to be in another space where poetry can really kind of save you.
Yes,
Kind of
it does.
Yeah.
It has saved me for sure. Poetry has saved me. Yeah. And I do agree with you that we need, you know, I say my story, this is a little drop in the bucket. I want thousands of stories. Salvadorans have amazing stories. You know, when you start talking to other compatriots, right? Other people who lived there during the war and even who are there now, and you hear their stories. They're powerful stories. We need to be able to share with each other. You know, I always say I'm really I admire and I am grateful for the fact that there are so many stories of the Holocaust, and that we continue. There's more stories of bravery and amazing stories, right, that continue to come out of that horrible time. And they're so necessary. And I feel equally so about the Salvadoran experience. We need many stories. Yeah.
So I think it's like you were saying, we have to give space to this literature.
Yeah.
This is the time. I'm glad we're part of it. We're not the only ones. There's a lot of interest around the country for the Central American Salvadorian story to be told. You having a memoir would be amazing. It's so powerful. It's a time for it. And so this is what I would recommend people. Please get this book. Get all our books, the Central American books that we published, but of course all our books are really amazing. But we want to emphasize that voice, the Central American voice, Salvadorian voice, that is not really heard and where it's kind of misunderstood around the country.
Yeah.
And I think that it's good to be clear. I know what happens in a lot of places outside of LA is people don't understand Salvadorian Central Americans at all. You know, generally they tend to mix them up with Mexicans. You know?
Yeah.
And it's important for people to know that there's so much similarities between us, but the differences is important to point out, because the differences means you're a people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? This is my distinctness, and that's important to be distinct in who you are, not to be homogenized. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
and it is that difference that gives us our strength, you know, and holding each other's stories that will make us stronger.
Yeah.
You know, for sure.
And then we can all brace each other as raza or Latinidad, como sea, whatever you want to call it. We can embrace each other by being able to see each other, who we really are.
Yeah.
Not homogenizing, not, you know. I spent some time in North Carolina where there was a lot of Mexicans, Central Americans, South Americans, but everybody was calling them Mexicans.
Yeah.
All the white people, and when people were saying, well, no, I mean, we're not. And
Yeah.
so, know who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And again, that voice of El Salvador speaks to what this country is, what has become, and the accountability that we should have as a country for what we do. So,
yeah, I mean, when you look at some of the historical, like I said, this memoir that I've been writing, I've been looking a lot of, you know, just record, right? The record of the war. And, you know, the U.S. at the time would say, you know, we don't know what's going on. And then we know through the classified documents that they not only knew, but they were instigating the situation, you know? And so absolutely the U.S. has, the war would have never been, the loss of life would have never been what it became. The tragedy of exile would have never been, you know, been to the degree that it's now millions of Salvadorans who live outside of, you know. And I mean, there's a poem in here about pupusas, right? Because when we came to the U.S. was 1981. You could not find Salvadoran tortillas, right, which are bigger and thicker. You could not find them. And there were no pupusas. I mean, we were really desperate, you know. But now I traveled, you know, everywhere you go, right? And that pupuseria is a way of saying we're here, but it's also a story of war. Those pupusas wouldn't have gotten here had that war not happened, you know. And you go to Kansas, you go to Texas, you go to Eastern Washington, rural Oregon, and there's like pupuserias everywhere, right? And so the poem in the book talks about that, and you know, it's a poem that got published in a journal a while back, and I read it and I think, oh my God, nothing has happened. Still the immigration debate is the same. Nothing has changed, and every time the poem says, you know, every time you take a bite out of a pupusa, you're eating war. This is the if it's an atomic thing, this is the debris, you know, of that moment, you know.
I was fortunate to have pupusas in Izalco.
Oh my God!
So
the birthplace,
you're right there, and it's the birthplace of the pupusas, but also then you're talking about history, and you're talking about the seeds that get planted out of a lot of pain, and you're talking about a lot of complicated issues, but also the direct thing: people have to live, have to thrive, and that's the struggle and what your poetry represents. I'm wondering if maybe we can entertain some questions or comments. We have some people here in the audience. If anybody wants to ask a question or comment, I'll kind of open it up a little bit here. Does anybody want to ask Claudia anything?
I just have to say, or I just have to express my gratitude. I mean, it's such, like you say, like a tortured history. And I mean, my grandparents were immigrants from El Salvador, and so it's so hard to like find a way to access their history, which is so rich, but so plagued with, like you say, warfare, with just poverty, with all these different things. And so to access like that part of my like culture through like this writing is like just it really is so transformative. I'm just so appreciative like for giving it a voice that it's like that maybe is just scared to come out, or just is not prepared to come out, or is it doesn't have the words to express it. Like you found them, and just thank you, and putting them down and for like sharing that. It's so powerful. I have to agree. Like it's just the writing is so like it just transfixes you. You just can't help but be immersed in it. And even me, like not like being part of the culture, understanding it's like it's a whole new world, and it's a beautiful world. Like you have to admire all that beauty amidst all the awfulness. I mean, you really do. It's such a beautiful story. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, I think that there's two things. There is a writer and there is a publisher who published the writer. You know what I mean? So yes, thank you for that. I think credit is also due to Luis, who read the manuscript and said, you know, we'll publish this. Publishing works that way. If it doesn't come to the eyes of somebody who could understand the depth of what you're saying, it will never see the light of day. You know, and so that's what I was saying at the beginning. I sent Luis the manuscript and he read it, and you said yes to it, you know? So it's two things meeting in the book, you know?
And it's important to note that Tia Chucha Press is known for the quality of our literature, because we get manuscripts from all over, a lot of writing programs, people send me, got friends everywhere, and I have to decide, we only do 2 books a year, so they have to be the best. And Claudia's book was like, I told her, I kept going back to it, and that's how I decide. We had a committee that was helping me, but they always come and go, so it's really me. Me and my designer are really Tia Chucha Press, that's us together. But I kept coming back to it. And again, I wouldn't just publish just to do it, or because I want to publish Claudia, who I happen to know from this other book, The Wandering Song. But she really is a beautiful poet. I will say something else. She's a great American U.S. poet. That's not just, she's Salvadoran, but she's as good as any poet out there right now. She was Seattle and Washington State's Poet Laureate, with their version of Poet Laureate. She was both of them. So she's moving up in the literary world in this country. And she's a child of war who found that ability to voice such terrible things in a beautiful way. And so anyway, I think that's why Claudia's voice is going to be important, and we would support it as long as we can because we need these voices. So thank you for what you said.
Yeah.
Do you have any like suggested or recommended like Salvadoran poets that you follow or that whose work you really admire or whose like people want to read for inspiration?
Well,
So many.
I mean, Luis was showing Leticia Hernandez Linares' book,
And we're gonna redo it again in October. It's been sold out. It's very important. I also recommend, of course, get the Wandering Song because it has all these great writers. And this is not just poetry; it's prose, it's fiction, it's a lot of beautiful work. And the Wandering Song is probably right now the leading Central American writing anthology in the country. And so you'll find a lot of great voices in here. Many of them have become my friends. So that
yes, it's true. It's a wonderful book. I keep on. I just got another one here because I keep on giving it away. You know. So yeah, it's really great. Yeah, and I mean, there's like Luis said, there's other poets, you know, that are coming out. Javier Zamora has a memoir that's just coming out, and he's got a book of poems or 2 books of poems. Alexandra Litton Regalado has a new book and has a new book coming out in October, but has another book as well. So these are, you know, and she's writing from El Salvador. So she's writing in English from El Salvador. Javier lives here. So I think more and more there's an emergence of that. And partly, I tell you, I was Poet Laureate of Washington State, and Washington is the urban core of Seattle and Puget Sound, but it's also very rural state, right? So there were times when I was, you know, in Eastern Washington. I remember particularly this one time I did a reading and I had a line of youth sort of against the edge of the room, and they waited until I was done to tell me they were Salvadoran. And I asked, you know, because I had been making reference to our lore, right? La Llorona, Siguanaba, Cipitío, and they didn't know those stories, right? Which to a Salvadoran kid, you know those stories. But also they were hungry for the story of their parents. And like my parents, it's really hard to speak of traumatic events. They return you to that time. So it's really hard to put yourself there, and I get it. But the new generation needs to know that's our collective history. And so I think that's why these books are so important, because we need to share these stories with those of us who have been born in the diaspora, who are hungry to position ourselves and to understand ourselves and to, you know, understand that yes, it's a torture place, but it's really beautiful. Believe me, it is staggeringly beautiful when you're there. I mean, you get off of that airplane. I mean, last time I was there, I got off of the plane, 5 a.m. The bird song was so overwhelming. I just wanted to stay there and listen. It was so magical. And I was crossing my fingers that my family wouldn't be on time, because I wanted to be under the tree for a little longer, you know, and they were on time, so I had to go. But it's like, it's really a special place.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments? Or?
I'll make a comment. I also want to express appreciation. My daughter's multicultural, and what you just said about how it's hard to share stories. So I'm culturally Mexicana, her father's Salvadoreño, and she regularly is asking me questions about his history, which he didn't get to share with us. And she hasn't, she wants to be able to visit to learn more, and I appreciate your book because I think she's going to get to connect in a way through poetry, in a way that she wouldn't if she would just pick up a history book.
Yes.
So I appreciate you putting this together and sharing and expressing like the challenge in sharing stories when from people that have experienced war, particularly Salvadorians in that war. So just thank you, and I look forward to reading it with her and learning with her.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And my kids also. I'm in a marriage that is bicultural and biracial, and so my kids too have, you know, 2 traditions, right? And they're, you know, they've never been to El Salvador, partly because and this isn't every Salvadoreño, but for me, I think as a 14-year-old, I was really devastated by that war. And it's taking me all this time to be able to find the courage to go back and not expect the war to still be there, because the war is still in my head. That's the problem. The war, I mean, I'm working through it, right? But, you know, we left, and I went back thinking it was going to be like when we left, which was at the height of the most terrible time. But no, people move on. I mean, I have cousins who have children, you know, some of my younger cousins I haven't met, right? And so life goes on, and El Salvador is a thriving place. And so I need to overcome that. And there's plenty of Salvadorans who go back every year for the holidays. It's a big surfing destination because the ocean is fantastic, right? Yeah. So I get that, because that's exactly the experience of my own children. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Good. I'm so glad to hear that. Anybody else have anything else they want to ask? Or?
Yeah, I just want to say the same thing. Again, appreciating. My grandparents came from El Salvador, and my grandma hasn't been back. And my mom barely went for the first time, like, I want to say 3 years ago, because my grandpa still has the memories of hearing about his siblings that were there, because thankfully my grandparents came right before the war started. And my mom was born like literally right before, so they were really lucky to come before. But they still had siblings and their parents that were still back home, and so even though like my direct family didn't feel the impacts of it, like, it still felt, because there's such a big disconnect. And the idea of the war and everything, and all the poverty that they experienced before leaving, it still lives in their head. And it's a huge disconnect of like coming, and all the stigma and racism and the force of assimilation. So it's just like piecing it all together, like 40 years later.
Yes. And it takes that long. You know, I mean, this book that came out this year, I have been in the US 40 years, you know. It takes that long, I think, sometimes to just find the valor to face it, because it's terrifying. So, and like I said, you know, it stayed in my head as I thought it would be, right? And it's taken me, I've gone more often now, the last couple of years. I mean, I haven't been this year, but I was there last year. And I'm moving away from expecting the tanks and the helicopters being there. They're not there. So it takes a while, and I think this is what needs to happen, is tell our stories. You know, in El Salvador, I come from a very small town, very close to Guatemala. I mean, Guatemala is like, right, 12 kilometers away, which is 6 miles. It's right on the border. And before the war, it was a poor community, right? But everybody knew everybody else. Like, you knew each other's stories. So-and-so graduated. So-and-so, you know, se raspó una rodilla, you know, so-and-so's. And in owning each other's stories, you have a sense of belonging. So we had each other's stories and each other's laughter, each other's pain. We were held in community. The war split us apart because we were afraid to even talk. It got to the point where you couldn't trust if your neighbor heard you, whatever your political opinions were, you might, you know, they might come for you, you know, and it happened, right? So it wasn't like people were inventing it, it actually happened. And so what it did is it created these gaps between us, even between families. We couldn't travel to other places because there were retenes, people were being stopped in buses, taken away. And so it essentially stopped the flow of stories. This is how I've come to understand, you know, we couldn't talk to each other anymore, even within families. And those silences then just lived inside our heads. And that's why it's so hard to talk about it, you know? I mean, and I understand there's a generation, there's a push sometimes to say, those are you're the old ones, you know? There's a new generation here in the US that we didn't live the war. That's not us. But yet the diaspora wouldn't be here without that triggering moment. So for me, it's so essential to go back and acknowledge and speak with people and hear those stories, you know? Because we've become whole in owning each other's stories. You feel like, oh, I'm part of, there's a whole bunch of us, you know, there's many of us. And hey, we're here, right? So, yeah.
Very important. And, you know, it's sad because we don't got the history books that cover this thing.
Yeah.
We don't got the history books that will tell the truth of this thing. And the sad thing is many of us lived through it. I mean, in other words, this is not history of generations that people still remember all these things. They're still there. They may not be talking about it, but the history is still alive, and we have to bring it out. We have to get people to speak out. And what Claudia and other writers are doing is giving permission. This is our time. Speak for these truths, especially now because the country is falling apart around immigration. Completely, you know, they just elected this the first Mexican-born Republican in Texas who wants to close the border. Can you imagine? I mean, that's where we're at now. Our own people are like, let's close the border. You know, I mean, it's how we have a lot of work to do, but I think this is where the poetry opens the way.
Yeah.
It begins that thing that just begins to open the way for people. And that's why these stories are important. And hopefully the history books will start coming out. And these scholars who come in, she went through the university, a lot of writers are coming through the universities. Hopefully they can get some of these stories out.
Yes,
You know.
and I agree that a lot of times through poetry or memoir, we learn the history in a way that is humanized, in the way that is real people telling. And so you know, you're not reading a dry timeline.
Exactly.
You know, you're reading it in the context of people's lives. That's why it's so important for those to exist, right? Those books to come and fill us, and not just us. I mean, not just us Salvadorans, but
the whole country, the whole world.
absolutely.
Because the whole world needs to know about what's going on and what happened and why. And people need to know this is now becoming a U.S. story. This is the story of this country.
Yeah.
I don't know, Johnny, if there's anybody has comments from.
I don't see him on Facebook or on YouTube. But parents, I think.
No. Okay. Yeah. So you go ahead.
I do have one. I guess. How do you navigate speaking? Like, how do you navigate these institutions that weren't made by us, for us, white institution, pro-capitalists, you know, white supremacists, very American perspective that not only gaslights you, but also ignores all the history and how much they've actually contributed to the erasure of our history and the destruction of our lands and our peoples, right? But not only that, when they do accept it, they accept it in a way where it's like, it's bare minimum, it's history, it's something that, you know, how do you navigate those spaces? I know you said even publishing a book, you need to find someone who's willing to publish it, right? You have a story, you need to find someone willing to publish it, right? And if it's not our own people trying to help us out, right? I doubt something like this will ever come out from a very white publishing publisher or whatever. How do you navigate it? You know, I think you said you were a professor or you're also in academia and stuff. That's something that I get so disconnected from higher education and academia and all this other stuff, because I feel so much of what I know and so much of what I've seen and what I've heard and what I've learned from my family and everything. And having to fight against all that is just very discouraging. And I just feel like I zone out and I just completely just block myself from even wanting to pursue something in academia or even, you know. Yeah,
well, I would say, you know, we belong in academia, right? We belong there. So we have to own that. We have to own that we belong in these spaces, and that our way of being in those spaces may look different, and we have to insist on our being there. You know, I mean, I teach at a university. I don't have a PhD. I have an MFA, right? I'm a writer. I'm there as a writer, And sometimes, I feel I'm aware that I don't have a PhD. I'm not a scholar in that way. And I've heard from, other folks who are in that situation, and I'm like, I'm the rebel scholar, I'm here like, this is a way of being, in the way in which we have survived, which is like still being there, but different, right? And so I have to own that, and I have to insist. There is a Benedetti, the writer Benedetti from Uruguay.
Yeah, exactly.
He has a quote that I've carried for easily 30 years. Hay que insistir, and I read that all the time. It's like I write it in corners of notebooks, we have to insist. And it's not easy, but we have to do it. We have to still, I may not get to do the things I want, but I surely, when the next Salvadoran comes along, they would know a little bit about what it is about because I was there. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's part of that is just insisting that we belong and that we are worthy. And I think I would have become a writer a lot earlier in my life because it was always my desire as a person. But there were no Central American women immigrants. I was born in El Salvador. Spanish is my first language, but I'm writing in English. I'm, like you said, I'm a U.S. writer, and I'm writing in English. There were no people like that. If I had had one person that I could be like, oh man, I could be like them, that would have been a beacon, some light that would have said, it's possible for a Salvadoreña to do this. But there's many of us now in that space, right? And that's the wonderful thing. And it may not be, there's not nearly enough, but there's enough of us that if that's what you want to do, then you have to go for it. And also I've come to realize academia is not the only way in which you could contribute.
There's a lot of ways. But it's almost occupying all the spaces. Even the races, the ones that they occupy, we have to push them out. We have to be there. You know what I'm saying? We have to be in every space. I know, but it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
I get it. Sometimes it's really amazing that you've gone as far as you've gotten, knowing that there's racism and all kind of class, society, all push into. But look at Claudia's trajectory. It could be anybody's. Everybody should be able to feel they can do it. But you're going to have to struggle through it. You're going to have to get really strong and say, I'm going to insist. Yeah. I'm going to exist and insist. So I really thought it's important. Occupy these spaces, but determine the spaces that you want to occupy. Mm-hmm. It's not like everybody has to do that.
Yeah.
But whatever space you're in, make sure your voice is there, your story is there. Don't ever be in a space in which you're invisible. You know what I'm saying? That's what happens. Be insisting. So I really think that's important. And again, maybe that's not the route you want to go. But everybody should be in all these, everywhere. We need to have our voices everywhere.
And validating each other, because I think in El Salvador, our lives were so not valued, so discardable, regular people's lives were just like not valued as a life should be valued, right? So that we also have inherited. And we need to understand, I've come to understand that la señora que echa las pupusas, the lady who's got the little restaurant, that's a cultural worker. She's writing a story of resistance with each pupusa that she's making. And I value that person. And I am in awe of their, in Seattle where I live, there's a woman, Ana Castro, who has a pupuseria. She's been there for a long time. Her story of living in El Salvador is epic, like so many of our stories. And I see Ana, and I'm in awe of her. She is to me the person who's carrying a piece of my culture and all of ours in every pupusa she makes, in every pastelito she makes. And so when we begin to reshift ourselves also in the way in which we see each other, so that you feel like I don't have to be a professor, I could do something else, and it's as important as that other work. I think that's what you're saying. That may not be your way, but know that your way is equally valuable because it's saying we're here and we're different too. We're all different, right? We like them. Everybody, we're just like everybody else, right? Some people are more inclined to academia. but or being an artist, a painter, or whatever it is.
Carve our way in there. One of the things about Tia Chucha Press, which started 33 years ago, is it was to do that. It's to create a space for this kind of literature. And, you know, I'm Chicano. I grew up in a different time. There wasn't Central Americans really. I mean,
Yes.
there probably always was, but it wasn't numerous. It was all Mexicano, Chicano. We were having our own issues and everything else, but there was no spaces for us. And I would have to say that Chicanos had to carve their way through,
Yeah.
which means that you had to push yourself to start your own presses. We used to have all these presses pop up. We created our own presses. Most of them died, but many of them stayed, and Tia Chucha is one of them. And I didn't even make it a Chicano press. I made it a press for the best voices. So it became all kinds of people. We published every ethnicity, everybody, you know. But the special thing about Central Americans to me, it's the time that we're in, and the period that the U.S. role in Salvador, but all these countries, and the way that migration has changed. It's not understood, and it's not properly being put in a proper perspective.
Exactly.
And I think we need, the only ones that can do it are the ones that have been through it.
Yeah.
We need the voices from people who've been there. And this is why Tia Chucha is honored to open that space. I mean, we're going to have other kinds of writers in other spaces, but we're very open to doing that because our communities here have become Mexican Central American. There's no community in LA that doesn't have Central Americans. Mexicanos, Chicanos, and Central Americans are really one community.
Yeah.
You know, many of them are intermarried. I mean, a lot of Mexicans running around. That's just the way it is. That's just the nature of our society and our community. So I want to keep that going and make sure that we're keeping it alive. So that's why we create our own spaces. So I think we're getting close to the end, Johnny. I know we can keep talking. I know Claudia's the kind of person you want to spend 2 or 3 days just sitting there talking. But I think we should probably end. And again, to repeat, please get the book. We have a beautiful virtual bookstore, tiachucha.org/bookstore. And you can get all these books. We have other books, by the way, but I wanted to emphasize some of the Central American writing. I'm actually missing the Honduran Abandoned Girls book that we also did called Counting Time, like People Count Stars. There's other books. But Tia Chucha has a great selection from all over. And so you're going to find great voices, but we're also going to emphasize the voices that need to be heard today. Claudia is one of them. We're so proud of publishing you.
Thank you.
And we're going to do everything we can to push the book out there, get it out there. Please do your part. Buy the book, tell your friends, and spread the word. This is an amazing, powerful poetry book, Salvadoreña, but it's also a great American. I'm talking about the America's voice, and also a world literary voice. This book is important for all literature as far as I'm concerned. So, thank you.
Gracias, Luis. Gracias y gracias a ustedes.
And
por
we'll
estar
do this
aquí.
again. We'll do this again.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being there.
Yeah. Muchas gracias.